going through the New Testament now. We finished the Old Testament in terms of 50 essential passages, and now we're going to look at 50 essential passages of the New Testament. And a gateway into all of that, and part of our reading, is John chapter 1. So even though John is the fourth in those gospel narratives, we're going to use it as the gate to get to all of the gospels and then into the New Testament. And the reason we're doing that is because of the very first verse. It says this: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now there's so much that should be happening when you hear that. It should remind you of the creation story in Genesis 1. The very first words in the Old Testament, in the beginning. And then we reach this New Testament, and the very first words in the book of John are in the beginning. So John is trying to connect you, but he's also especially trying to define who Jesus is. And that's what the Gospels are. It's the story of Jesus. It's the good news of who he is. And so with that, we need to understand, what does that mean? It's almost like poetry, but poetry can be confusing. In the beginning was the Word. What? And as an English-speaking person, I get confused. I'm thinking, are you talking about like letters that create a word? What do we mean by that? If you think of it as a nickname, maybe that'll help. And what I mean by that is, in basketball, there's a lot of legendary players that have been given nicknames. One of the players that had a great nickname was Allen Iverson, and he was called the Answer. And the reason they called him the Answer was because the NBA had exploded in popularity because of Magic Johnson, another nickname, and Larry the Legend, Larry Bird. And so they were retiring, and yet their personalities and their abilities made the NBA enormously popular and successful. And so the question was, who's next? Who's going to be the answer? And so someone gave that name to Allen Iverson. Now, he's not literally the answer, but it's a nickname that points you to characteristics. Here in Southern California, we have another person that has a nickname, the Black Mamba. It's a little cheesy because he started by giving it to himself, but it was accurate in the way that his footwork was. He was precise, the way he approached angles, and his mentality that he would win at whatever cost, which is very similar to the snake, the Black Mamba. And so when in John 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word, the reference is to Jesus. And so God is giving Jesus this nickname, so to speak, the Word or the Logos. And I like the translation, the voice. And so if we look at that and we think of this as a gateway into the New Testament, because it's a gateway into the Gospels, because it's the entryway into understanding Jesus better, then let's understand what God is trying to communicate when he calls his Son the Word. The Word was in the beginning. And remember, God spoke everything into existence. Isn't that powerful? And it says that Jesus was there because there's a triune God. God is one, but he's three. And as Brent shared last week at church, it's a very complicated truth of who God is. And so this helps us to make it more simple. This helps to simplify the approach to trying to understand who Jesus is. And we want to understand that because later in John, it says, those who received him were given the right to be called children of God. And we want that. And so we want to understand what we're receiving. Who is this Jesus that we're expected to receive? So logos is a word that is used all throughout that period of time. With the Greeks, with the Egyptians, with scholars, with non-scholars. But I think that the powerful message that's being created there is that the Word is the embodiment of God, because it's referring to literal speech. And think of it, this is God speaking. What better way to describe Jesus? That his speaking is God itself. I love that. If you settle in on that and you understand what a voice is a bridge between the sender and the receiver. And so God has sent Jesus as the bridge for us to see who he is by looking at Jesus. In the beginning was the voice, and the voice was with God, and the voice was God. And what we're going to have to come to grips with in this is that if it's a bridge between the sender and the receiver, and we're supposed to be the receiver, are we going to accept this voice? Are we going to submit, or as John 1 says, receive, to accept, to draw in, to embrace? Are we going to embrace the Logos, the Word, or the voice? What does that look like? Well, I want to give a simple story as a way to look at it. It's not complete, but it helps us to understand what does it mean to receive. So my boys, I have two of them, and when they were younger, we would all surf together. And then they would come in, and then I'd come in later because they got tired. And then it changed. And I came in way before them. But I knew that we needed to leave so often, and they didn't want to get out of the water. And they were way out there. And so I'm changed, I'm in dry clothes. I can't go get to them. Or the truth is, I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go do this whole wetsuit thing again just to go and get them and say, hey, it's time to get out of here. We've got to be places. We have responsibilities. There's things that need to get done. It's time. Do what your dad is telling you to do. And so I could whistle, like, but that's not going to go 300 yards out to where they are. It's not going to travel that far. And so what I did was I drove around, because everybody seems to drive a lot, and I was driving around a lot, and I would practice whistling. I had dead time in the car. I'd practice on whistling without having to use my fingers, and I could just bust it out. I figured it'd be effective for a lot of things, but especially I wanted to use it for them so they would know that I was sending them a message. And so I got better at it and better at it and better at it. And I won't do it now because I don't want to blow out the speakers on this. But I got to the point where I could easily project it 300 yards. And so when they were out in the water and it was time to go and I needed them to go, I needed them to obey their father because I knew what was best, I would bust out the whistle. Now they're 21 and 19 years old. I tried it the other day when I was at visiting one of my sons at college, and they were at a distance. And there was this huge event, and so I threw out the whistle. And I saw my son look because he recognized my voice. Do you recognize his voice? Later on in John chapter 10, Jesus is describes himself actually as the good shepherd. And he says, my sheep know my voice, but if they hear a stranger's voice, they run away. Because they recognize that any voice that is not from the good shepherd is from someone else. Do you know that? Do you know his voice? The way to become familiar with that voice is to receive him. To take that leap of faith and move in the direction of the voice. May God bless you.